Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this wonderful session of the Unity Summit. Today, we are going to be talking about AI, misinformation, and disinformation with two really amazing folks, and hopefully Secretary Adrian Fontes, who we are checking on, but sometimes the Secretary's schedule dictates that he is elsewhere. But my name again is Angela Hughey. I am the co-founder and president of One Community and One Community Foundation. Today, we're going to focus on how technology increasingly plays a role for better or worse in our policy landscape, public perception, and discourse. Our panelists are going to discuss how they approach their work, progress, and challenges in recent years, and trends we can expect to see in the coming years. But before we get into the conversation, I'd love to give Rebecca and Minky the opportunity to tell us a little bit about themselves. Rebecca, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. Well, first, everyone, Happy New Year. Thanks for being here and kicking off your year with us on this really important topic. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Botco.ai. We're an Arizona-based AI startup, as the name might suggest. And I have been based in the Valley now for over 20 years. This is my home, my community. I've built my family and my businesses here. So thank you so much, Angela, for inviting me to participate on this important topic. It's my honor to be here with you today.
So glad you're here, Rebecca. And Minky, can you let everybody know a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, Happy New Year. And I'm so thrilled to be here. My name is Minky Kernacs. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mercurio Analytics, as well as the chair for the Arizona Tech Council's AI Ecosystem Committee, where we are focused on facilitating education, innovation, and collaboration within Arizona to create thought leadership here. And at Mercurio, we help government agencies embrace emerging technologies such as AI and whatever comes next by creating that solid foundation to create policies based on evidence-based facts rather than just gut instincts. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're both here. And Janine, if you can hear, Janine, you're still on the Zoom. If you can disengage, there we go, Janine. Thank you so much. Janine was going to stay with us, it looked like. So thank you both for being here. This is a really important discussion. And there he is, as if we just knew he would miraculously appear. How are you, Secretary Fontes?
I'm late.
You are indeed late, but you know, our wonderful panelists, Rebecca and Minky, both bought you some time. They were so kind and introduced everyone to who they are and the fantastic work they're doing. So Adrian, would you like to take a moment to tell everybody about your professional background and the work you do as the Secretary of State?
Oh, sure. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I'm Adrian Fontes. I'm Arizona's 21st Secretary of State. Not 22nd, although one secretary served in two separate, so there's a controversy there, but it follows me everywhere. I am a graduate of Arizona State University. I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and I'm an attorney by trade. And I practiced for quite some time before I ran for my first office as the Maricopa County Recorder. And I ran what ended up becoming the second largest voting jurisdiction in the United States of America, Maricopa County. And we did a whole bunch of stuff, really revitalizing and revolutionizing the way that we administer elections on the inside, although voters on the outside only saw changes insofar as transparency and accountability were concerned. I then ran for, I was out of office for a couple of years and won my election for Secretary of State in 2022, and have been having a great time since then. And our performance in 2024 is great evidence of that. We're really focusing on helping all 15 of Arizona's counties do the work that they need to do. Arizona's a bottom-up state, which means the secretary doesn't run the elections, but is responsible for training folks, finding the resources that the counties need, and really kind of coordinating statewide sort of the way we do things. The counties do the lion's share of the actual work, and understanding that I was able to ask the right questions and get the right things moving. And 2024 was great. And I think the great evidence of our preparation in this one example really speaks loudly to why it is that we're in such a good space here in Arizona. On election day, 2024 in Arizona, we had well over a dozen bomb threats on the day of the election, but we had de minimis disruption. In fact, the biggest disruption was in one location where there was a 20-minute delay in serving some voters. Now, these threats went from polling places to vote centers to county election offices, but because we were prepared and well prepared, coordinating with emergency managers, law enforcement, the media, our own election administrators across the state, and that long-term, a year and a half worth of preparation just for those sorts of things, we got past it real well. Nobody knew or heard much about it except for on the day of. And so we're super excited about the work that we've done here in the Secretary of State's office. And in this role, I'm also, as a side note, in charge of the Business Services Division of the Secretary's office, as well as the State Library and Archives and Public Records. So those are some of the duties that I encompass. And today I am at your service. So here we are.
Well, thank you for the incredible work you're doing. And right before we started the call, we were talking about how disinformation and misinformation can truly lead to more credible threats. So to hear that there were 20 bomb threats during election day, and that your office, I'm sure, coordinating with local law enforcement and federal law enforcement, were able to ensure that our elections went off safely. We're deeply grateful for the work of yourself and the folks that work alongside of you. So let's get into what I think is obviously a very, very, very important topic, talking about misinformation and disinformation. And in order to kind of tee this up, I think maybe we start with a question about what is the difference between misinformation and disinformation, and why is it important to distinguish between the two? Minky, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So misinformation is just somebody making a mistake. I'm going to use the flat earth theory, right?
Okay.
It's just something that someone believes that's not based on fact. It's just an opinion, it's speculation. Disinformation, on the other hand, is so much more dangerous, right? It is somebody has an agenda behind it. There is a nefarious purpose to mislead people completely and to meet their agendas. And it's one is just an innocent thing. The other one is quite on purpose. I'm going to go ahead and just give it over to Rebecca, or the secretary.
Yeah, I think what you pointed out, Minky, is intentionality is really the difference, right? One is disseminated with the intent to harm and the intent to do something with it, to alter an outcome. The other is, like you said, it's more out of naivete or lack of facts, or like you said, opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I could just
go for it.
Yeah, I just throw this in. The way I see these misinformation, disinformation, and then malinformation, which doesn't get talked about too much. Misinformation, in my view, is sort of the reckless standard, right? You did something without checking, you make the mistake, right? As has been pointed out. Disinformation is intentional. You intentionally, or you knowingly put out bad information, all right? You knew that the information was bad. You put that bad information out knowing that it was bad. Malinformation is information that's put out intentionally. So there's reckless, knowing, and intentional. The intent to cause harm is different than the intent to put out fake information, right? Putting out fake information, knowing that it's fake, doesn't necessarily mean you know that it's going to cause harm. You might be trying to prank somebody, but you know that it's fake. You might be trying to fool someone, but you know that it's fake. If you intend for harm to happen, that in my view is malinformation. So I think those three distinctions, and I hearken back to my days as a prosecutor and sort of those three levels of mens rea that you see in the criminal law when I look at that. But misinformation and disinformation can bleed slowly into that malinformation section. So those two major categories, I think, are really what's most to be dealt with here.
Anything either of you'd like to add? I mean, it seems to me like everything's connected though, right? Because it's like if people start buying into misinformation, then we're going into the malinformation. Do I have it correct? like it leads to malinformation?
I believe.
Well,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I believe so, because what happens is that information it spreads and you can't control it. Whoever creates it can't control it. Then it bleeds into kind of the tribal opinion culture. Right now you're getting bombarded all around. Other people are using that again and bombarding you with more information that's similar. As we were talking about, the algorithms will feed you more of what you are looking at. So now that small, even if it was misinformation, can go into disinformation, which goes into malinformation, which is all based on opinion and speculation. And that just snowballs into this huge chaos that I think that we're seeing today.
Yeah, and I see the causality in the reverse, in the examples that we have from foreign adversaries, for example. We understand very clearly that the vast majority of this bad information, we'll put it all in the bucket of bad stuff,
All bad.
comes from our good friends in Russia, in China, in North Korea, and in Iran. This is, in my view, malinformation. They put bad stuff out there intending for it to grab hold. That's malinformation. But when it lands in the United States or in any other of the Western democracies where it's intended to do its harm, then it can become disinformation or misinformation by the people who share it. So the malinformation, we intend this to be bad. We intend it to have a bad result. Now, that is an intentional act. Knowing that it's false, now, the people who share it are sharing disinformation because they know that it's false. And those are the useful idiots here and in other Western democracies that know something is false. They know these are undependable sources. They know that these folks have this intent, and then they share it out there anyway. That's the knowing disinformation share. And then the rest of it gets spread by other folks who just don't know any better, but it sounds sexy to them. These are the algorithms, I think, that are being spoken of. And that's when, it gets out there as the misinformation. So from my perspective, if you're looking at a culpable mindset, if you're looking at really categorizing how it comes to be, that's where, like, the malinformation is intentional. The bad guys want us to think these things, and then it bleeds out into more and more innocuous, more and more innocent space, but it starts from someone who wants to punch us with bad information.
With bad information. Rebecca, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I come from a media background, so just a little bit of insight. I've worked in marketing my whole career. I own a marketing agency. We buy a lot of ads on behalf of businesses, and I've worked in that space quite extensively. And I saw the rise of kind of the influencer, right? In fact, we were one of the first agencies in Arizona to implement social media campaigns on behalf of large brands at Ideas Clyde, my other business. And one of the things that we discovered is that the incentives are set up for, unfortunately, in social media, the incentives are set up for, capturing an audience and engaging them. Engagement is really the big metric, right? And what do we know about the human brain? It tends to engage in anything that triggers our fight or flight kind of response, right? And so one of the things that we have discovered is that fear mongering is very effective, and it works really well in social media. And so our, as Mr. Fontes pointed out, our enemies have taken that, and they've seen this incredible economy that we've created around influencers, around engagement, the engagement economy, and they're basically using it back against us by infiltrating with content that they know is going to spread very quickly, because these individuals are essentially being rewarded for high levels of engagement, and they're not going to put out content that doesn't engage. So there is a kind of economic factor here too, where things start to get spread, because that's how they're going to make money in the end. So I think for us as business leaders, one of the things that I always encourage is to really understand what are the media platforms that we're utilizing. Are those media platforms playing a role in the spreading of these informational tactics that maybe our brands don't want to be affiliated with or want to distance ourselves from? And to take a very thoughtful view in terms of what are those media platforms that we're going to leverage from a branding or a business standpoint. So we're not, in a sense, co-opting and participating in that system. It can be very challenging, but it's certainly something that as leaders, we need to take that role very seriously, I believe.
Absolutely. So how do we think that AI and social media and misinformation and malinformation and disinformation, how is it impacting us politically? And Mr. Secretary, you started to kind of go there talking about Russia and China, but how is it impacting us in Arizona politics? Obviously, and we just had a election. We have a new administration coming in, on January 20th. How is AI and misinformation and disinformation playing a role in how we see the world?
Well, it's a good question. And here's the hook. We haven't seen the last of the utilization of AI, generative AI, in this bad information space. The bad guys haven't gotten sophisticated enough to meet to the where, and for the first time in a long time, based on a lot of different types of bad tactics, they haven't gotten good at being bad as quickly as we thought they would. Okay, when we did have instances in New Hampshire, for example, the robocall with President Biden's a fake voice of President Biden. We've seen a lot of other political ads popping up here and there during this cycle, but the bad guys, as far as we can tell, and we'll put a star on that. I'll come back to that in a minute. As far as we can tell, there wasn't a ton of usage of AI as it pertains to dis, and malinformation. And there was some out there, but it wasn't anywhere near as much as we thought it would be. Now, I have an AI advisory committee made up of experts from across the globe, OpenAI, Meta, Google's on there. We've got some academics, folks from the Institute for the Future. We're going to be putting out our final report in the next week and a half or so here, once we put that together. What we saw was less than what we anticipated. But here we'll go to the pin. We don't know what we don't know. We didn't see anything in WhatsApp. We didn't see anything on signal groups. We didn't see anything in these encoded spaces where you have folks who are having full-blown interactions, who are having full-blown conversations and discussions. But if they're in these encrypted platforms, we have no idea whether or not those were being utilized to promote dis, and malinformation, particularly if it was artificially generated or not. It doesn't really matter. So from the platforms that we could see and we could analyze, we didn't see as much as we thought we would. And it wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to get, which is great. At least we dodged the bullet this time around. But there's a whole space that's still shrouded in mystery, and we may never know what, if any, impact these sorts of information had on voter suppression, on influence in the political this side versus that side space, and or in any other way as it pertains to our elections and election administration.
Minky or Rebecca, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, so I think that we are in a very interesting and exciting time right now. We are in a transitional phase. What AI is going to look like 5 years down the road, even next year, we have no idea.
Can't even imagine, right?
And I love the fact that Secretary Fontes put out a what was that, fake video, saying this is not me, this is AI generated, and you would not know the difference. And so since we're in a transitional phase, we cannot regulate fast enough without squashing free speech. And what I'm loving that I saw today was that Meta is actually moving away from the fact checkers and moving to AI-driven content summarization to say this is fake, this is not fake, things like that. And I'm excited to see what's happening there. But I think that the onus is really going to have to be put on the individual consuming the information. And we're going to have to be smarter. Just because it's technology and it's easier to access does not mean that we don't have to stay vigilant and really pay attention. Because if I were to tell you something came from the National Enquirer, you'd look at me and say, that's just nonsense, as opposed to the Wall Street Journal. We have to do that as well with every piece of information that we consume, regardless of the media type, be it digital or in print. And I think that once we understand that as a whole, then we'll start understanding and start tackling this disinformation, and we'll be in a better place. It'll open up discussions as well. But I think from politically, I think it's very dangerous to just believe everything that you see.
Rebecca, anything you want to add? I feel like all of this is so overwhelming, right? And Minky, absolutely. We as individuals that are consuming information have a responsibility to understand the sources that we're consuming from. I guess my question really is, in so many ways, do people just get so overwhelmed, right? And if there's algorithms and you keep getting fed the same information, do we just kind of buy in? And that responsibility that we absolutely have to make sure that what we're reading or what we're buying into is correct, it seems like it gets lost somewhere with all of the inundation of the misinformation and the disinformation and the malinformation. So I'm trying to get through the noise somehow.
It really is, because we are being bombarded from information everywhere, be it CNN, Fox, Al Jazeera, whatever it is, plus social media, plus, everything that we're hearing from people. We have to go on an information diet. We have to have healthy information, right? And I think that's where we really need to go. And it's very easy to scroll and get put in that opinion bubble. And that's the easiest thing, and it's the laziest thing to do.
Agreed. So I'm hearing more accountability from us as consumers of media and information. Rebecca, did you want to add something there?
I always like to use AI as a tool itself to help combat the issue. So there are some great ways to actually use AI to test and validate information. So we've even built a system within our Botco.ai platform, and it's a little bit more utilitarian, but the idea is that we fact-checked the AI with other AIs, right? And so you create a chain of AIs that essentially verify each other, and it tends to be quite foolproof. We can take the accuracy rate of a response from around 80% upward to 98, 99%. When you're doing these multiple fact checkers. So I would encourage people to look into that as a tool. Obviously, you're not going to do that for everything you're consuming. There's also some other great services. I had mentioned one that's called Adrian Fontes. Funny enough, same last name as our secretary here. Adrian Fontes Media, that publishes media bias temperature on any kind of media outlet. So as businesses, you can use that to leverage and understand maybe where your ads or your messaging is running to make sure it's, in a place that's favorable to whatever bias level you want or would prefer to avoid. So I just say, use those tools, and then good old-fashioned critical thinking, right? We should be teaching that in our schools. We should be, I think right now, as parents, as leaders, teaching our team members, teaching our younger folks how to think critically, what are the questions we should ask ourselves with regard to any content we're consuming, just like you would a report, right? You would analyze it and say, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what is the intent of this? We should somehow have a shorthand for doing that with all of our content. And I think, a little measure of critical thinking can go a long way as well.
Critical thinking, and it sounds like AI can start helping us fact check, so we can find our way through the weeds and the noise and get to information that is not misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. Got it. Okay, so we have our work cut out for us. Speaking of having our work cut out for us, Secretary Fontes, you mentioned this briefly, but I'd like for you to dive in a little further. Your office formed an AI task force. Can you tell folks about what that task force was meant to do and the work that's being done by the task force?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, what we did was call on some folks from the civil society sector, academia, technology companies, and a couple folks that have worked here and there in government. And the idea was early last spring, we got together once a month and we just started talking about AI, its potential uses, and potential dangers insofar as elections are concerned generally. So we talked about election administration, we talked about impact on voters, we talked about politics, we talked about sort of a lot of the general stuff that we're talking about here on this call. Some of it had to do with generative artificial intelligence, et cetera. Interestingly, I'll give you this little side note. Every meeting started with what we called a round robin. And so there was never less than about a dozen or so folks on this call, and each person would get about 2.5 minutes to talk about what was happening in the AI world since the last meeting. So imagine you've got this global array of AI brains who all they do is deal with this stuff all the time. And once a month, you get this download of everything that has happened. So I can't remember, I think it was Rebecca maybe that said that how this is changing so quickly. You cannot appreciate how fast things are changing unless once a month, every single person on that call was talking about something different, some different way to employ agents and the way that tokens work and things of this, and all of the useful stuff, the pragmatic stuff, but then sort of the out there stuff, how logic is working its way into some of the models, and even now, as we start wrapping up the work of the committee. So we really were looking at ways to, number one, help to secure our elections, whether through the engagement of AI in security systems or prevention of AI's bad uses within and around our systems. Number two, how is it that we might be able to not just have that plus minus impact on voters, but internally into the actual processes that we use for any of the sort of the mundane work of election administration. For example, checking ballots. Can we create an AI agent that like Maricopa County would be able to use? Because guess what? Maricopa County's elections, they'll have 10,000 ballot styles in one election. That means they've got to proof 10,000 different styles of ballot. Can you use an AI agent somehow to proof those or to help proof those in a way that was described here to get through those? So we had a lot of really interesting discussions in everywhere from security to HR matters to supply chain management to not just physical security, but information technology, security systems, networking security, and things like this. So it really did encompass a whole bunch of stuff. And it was a joy. And it was mind-blowing, and I really, really enjoyed the heck out of it. It was really fun because every once in a while, someone from the private sector would get their feet held to the fire by someone from, someone in the public space, civil society or something. They'd say, well, your company just announced blah, 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 and this and this. So what you just said is kind of bullshit. And it was a great conversation. So I gained a great deal. The report, like I said, is going to be coming out in the next week and a half from the experiences that we've had. And I encourage people to look for that coming up so you can see a lot of the discussion that we had and sort of where it went. It was a little amorphous, but it was a great learning experience. A lot of my staff attended from the IT department, from our elections department, from our business services department. So we gained an enormous amount of information just through the work of that committee.
Awesome. Looking forward to seeing the report. Minky, I want to go back to your accountability question, right? Or saying that we as consumers of information need to be accountable in understanding, the information that we're consuming. Let's talk about strategies, right? Like what types of strategies? I know we need to be on an information diet. We need to be aware of how we're consuming things. And it seems to me like look at things, understanding that not all the information that we're consuming is necessarily true, right? Let's discuss ways that you think folks can dive deeper to understand if like what they're actually reading or consuming is true. Like what should an everyday consumer of information be looking to do?
Do your own checking, as Rebecca said,
Okay.
in critical thinking. And I'll give you an example because we help government agencies create policies and programs based on actual data. And before one of the reasons we started is because leaders and policymakers were going off of gut instinct and going off of whatever they thought. By providing the down granular level detail of the information, they were able to see different aspects and the impacts of their policies on different populations, right? And which they didn't have before. And this is what I mean, when you go down to the granular level, when you're looking at the information, facts can be manipulated, but when you are evaluating yourself and asking the questions, is this actually true and what impact does it have? What I do, I look at social media and say, okay, this is a very interesting thing from somebody who's absolutely, I think, is crazy, but let me go check, right? And I'll go do a Google search or anything like that and just find out on my own, because going directly to the source is the only way that you're going to know what your thought process, what your opinion, and what your beliefs are on that topic. I'm one of those people that I don't like to be told what to think.
Mhm.
And so I will do my own research. So I'm educated and informed on what's going on. I think yesterday was the joke of the day for me was talking about Vice President Harris not certifying the elections, where she had done that, right? And it came after that. And I'm like, this is the most ridiculous thing out there. But people will say, oh yeah, she did not certify it. Yeah, it's so silly. So you have to do your own research. You have to just take things with a grain of salt and just say, this is some information, but you have to really put in the work to understand. And the other thing you have to figure out is, do you care? You know, going back to the flat earth theory, do I
Sure.
care if the
Does
earth
it
is
matter?
flat? No, I get in my car and I drive. I don't have to worry about calculations of figuring out how, if the earth is flat or not. I just don't care, because I just don't have that much time in my life to worry about these things. So I just sit there and laugh at these things, but I find them amusing. But those are some of the strategies. And I think taking that responsibility on yourself to say, this is how I'm going to believe, rather than being told.
Yeah.
Angela, if I could jump in really quickly
Sure.
here and give just a respectfully opposing perspective on this. That's really nice if you've got all the time in the world to, operate under sort of a caveat emptor attitude towards information, which is let the buyer beware and let the information be out there. That's exactly the opposite of what governance and good governance ought to do. We enjoy the First Amendment in this country in a way that most other countries don't have, and that is the fact that we can say what we want and the press can say what it wants. But there are consequences to some sorts of speech. You cannot yell fire in a crowded theater because that poses a risk of public danger. You cannot, for example, you cannot scream that you've got a bomb while you're in an airport. There are a variety of ways that we regulate speech in this country for public safety. Now, do we do it in politics? No, we're much more laissez-faire when it comes to politics. But the notion of buyer beware as it comes to information, when we're in the information age and we have unnumbered sources of information, is a shirking of responsibility of those who should be governing, and it shoves the entire burden onto the consumer. And I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's right. I don't think that the consumers ought to be walking into a snake pit and then just, well, that one might be poisonous. You got to check. Well, how the hell do you check? And how do you get to the original source? And so I think that there ought to be some give and take here. And I think that there ought to be a little bit of a paradigm shift. When we did only have, maybe there was 2 competing newspapers in a community, or you only had 3 major networks and an independent TV broadcast in a community, the truth really mattered. And you were truth checking one another because there was a limited number of sources from which the information came. And those sources of information were willing to check themselves and one another when it came to the truth. That doesn't exist anymore because there is an innumerable number of sources of information. And so the responsibility now goes to the consumer. That doesn't make a ton of sense. I think we need to think very carefully not only about the notion of free speech and the free press, but also the responsibility of the individuals who are sharing information for good or bad information. If you're telling someone, if your social security number ends in an odd number, you vote on Wednesday. You are committing a crime, I think. You are actively engaged in voter suppression. That should not fall to the consumer to have to check that. And then you can go to all kinds of things. You can do vitamins and healthcare. You can do, zoning ordinances, and you just pick your space where information comes from and how it impacts the average person. So what I think we need to do is be much more cautious about shifting the burden for information filtration onto the consumer, where the information is basically all of our consumer society. We don't do that with milk. We don't do it with steak. We got regulations for just about everything else other people are consuming. We do it with cars and everything else. I think we ought to very carefully consider, and I'm not advocating for censorship, not by the least, but I certainly do think that we ought to consider whether or not information is valuable enough and important enough to be regulated to the degree that will not impinge on the rights of individuals, but will also keep us away from the harm that a lot of this bad information is imputing into our society.
I absolutely agree. And I'm looking at it from today. There is not enough regulation that can be implemented fast enough to actually keep the consumer safe,
100%. That's the
so
difference.
how in this transitional period, how do you make sure that you're not getting bad information, and what are some of those strategies? I would love to have Walter Cronkite back, I really would. But unfortunately, everyone has an opinion, everyone has a voice, and it's out there on social media, and it is being broadcast to no end. And really understanding who is credible and who are you going to listen to, rather than who just supports your way of thinking, looking at it from that perspective. And I would love to have something that says, we're going to regulate this information, but we're just not there yet. And that's what I'm waiting for.
So, question for all of you. Do you think that there's a way to pre-bunk? Is there any way to prevent misinformation from kind of getting out there? Is it these types of regulations that we need to perhaps look into? Or is there any other strategy that we can put in place, to encourage better information being put out there, more truthful information being put out there on social media and through news and media outlets?
I mean, I think the business community can certainly play a role in what we support with our media dollars, with our investments. And so as buyers of media or as brands, whatever your business or your organization might be sponsoring out there in the world, I would say, be very thoughtful about what media partners you're bringing in, and who you're working with, whether they're influencers, whether they're, some other type of media personality, and making sure that as a partnership, we're not supporting those kinds of the proliferation of malinformation or disinformation. So I would say that's probably one of the most powerful non-regulatory approaches we can take, right? We can let kind of government take its place, go out and vote and do all that stuff, but that will be slow, as Minky suggested. But as businesses, we can allocate dollars to credible sources, or we can allocate dollars to non-credible sources. And that's for each of us to decide. So I would say as business leaders, that would be the first thing I would try to do. And then second is kind of the idea of inoculation, right? Helping people to easily detect what might be kind of suspicious, right? Or sus, as they say. And just help people identify very quickly. These are common things that you'll notice in potentially erroneous information. So just kind of create little kind of mental models for those and let people know. I mean, we certainly have to do it within our companies all the time to prevent cyber attacks, and also with our grandparents to make sure they're not falling for scams, right? So we've figured out a way to kind of shorthand this, and we just need to do more of that for the time being.
And I think there's a temporal difference between the two. So pre-bunking and what Rebecca's talking about, which is the active investment in the trusted sources and a better suited media outlets, I'll say it that way. That comes before, right? That's really sort of something that you do in preparation for these sorts of things or to prevent them from happening. Regulation isn't going to prevent anything from really happening, except as a deterrent. Regulation really usually is there to partially to deter, but mostly to react. If something bad happens, there's some consequence because of that. Regulation deters to a degree, right? We have regulations, for example, against murder. It still happens, but a lot of people don't do it because they are deterred, right? It's the same type of thing. And now that's an extreme example. I get it, but I wanted to make the point there. So, but pre-bunking does work. I will say that. And particularly in specific areas where you're targeting specific consumers. So really quick example of pre-bunking that was actually not pre-bunking. This was before the mis, dis, and malinformation days. Elections officials across Arizona used to have a different day that they would tell people was the last day to mail back their ballot. Okay, so people were getting a bunch of different, it's Tuesday ahead of time, Friday ahead of time, whatever. And we all got together back in 2018. And I remember vividly the meeting. It was down when I was running elections in Maricopa, and we said, this is the date we're going to use. We're all going to say the exact same thing. And lo and behold, what happened? Those folks that we were talking to, which were our voters, the ones that were paying attention to that communication space, got the message. And we had an enormous influx from the year in and year out stats of mail that came in on what we told them was the last day. And then after that, it dropped off to almost nothing, right? But that's because we pre-bunked the idea that this date, that date, whatever. We gave everybody instructions. If you're communicating clearly to the consumer, regardless of what the product or service is, even if it's a public service, that in and of itself, that clear communication, and I know these communication professionals will agree with me, that clear communication will go miles and miles and miles to defray any of the bad impact that mis, dis, or malinformation might have. So the key, in my view, is to do the best possible pre-education when it comes to whatever systems you're working with, whatever services or products that you're offering. That is really important, and it goes directly to Minky's point, and that is also, which is the better educated, better prepared consumer of ideas and information will be able to consume ideas and information better.
Yeah, and kind of to add on to that, Secretary, I would say we should make the official sources as user-friendly as the unofficial sources, right? Because what often happens is that the official source is boring. It's, you get the letter and it's on white background, no graphics, right? Or whatever, right? It just looks very boring, and maybe it only comes once. But we know that as consumers, we need to see a message 15 to 20 times in order to remember it.
Get it, yeah.
Right. And so if the bad guys are sending us 20 reminders of bad information and it's very engaging, and the official sources are sending us one and it's just not very interesting and it's only one time, right? We have to kind of level up to we learn for the bad guys, right? Of making the official sources very user-friendly and accessible as well.
I would love to make my office sexy and engaging. Unfortunately, the state legislature has fiscal priorities other than that. But I get your point, and I think you are correct.
But to Rebecca's point, Mr. Secretary, we had 13 ballot initiatives on the general election, like 4-page ballot.
Yeah.
And we read through the telephone book that you mailed us. And thank you for sending that as a PDF version as well. So we didn't go through the physical one. We went through the PDF, and we sat down and did podcast on this is what a yes vote and this is what a no vote means. And those podcasts were literally watched thousands, and we made it succinct, right? They were like 3 to 5 minutes, the vast majority of them, thousands and thousands of viewers of these ballot initiative podcasts. So to Rebecca's point, we communicated often. I don't know how sexy I was in a podcast, but the conversation were, I think, entertaining, right? We made the issues make sense, and we really helped to explain to voters what a yes vote or a no vote meant. And I think it was really, and folks, we had a lot of feedback that it was like really helpful. So it seems like we all play a responsibility. Going back to Minky's first and very important message is that the responsibility is on all of us. It's on the business community. It's on all of us to be good partners, right, in communicating and pre-bunking, so we can cut through the noise until we figure out better solutions. Is what I'm hearing. Did I encapsulate all that pretty good?
I think so.
Good. All right, so we have a question, a couple of questions from folks that are joining us today. This one's from Alan. He wants to know if we think that AI will allow us on any level to be less in an echo chamber, or will the echo chambers we live in just get worse as a result of AI? Anyone want to tackle that?
It depends on how open you are. Yeah, I personally, I listen to Fox, CNN, Al Jazeera, Indian news, news from everywhere, because somewhere in the middle is the information.
It's the truth.
And that bursts my echo chamber bubble all the time.
Well, I think at some point, along the lines of what Minky's talking about, on a more practical side, I mean, I can imagine getting an AI agent to select stories from a variety of preset news sources if they do appear on a particular subject, and then be able to drive a better use of information, but you're still filtering. And so, particularly with the large language models, you're asking a specific question for a specific result, and you're going to get that result through the AI agent. So are you creating more of a fishbowl? Are you narrowing the scope? Yeah, because you're asking the question if you're using it that way. If, however, part of the question is, I want to hear a diversity of voices. I want to hear from 2 or 3 or 4 different sides of these issues, from original sources, things of this nature. I think it really kind of depends on how we utilize the tool. Artificial intelligence isn't per se bad. As a matter of fact, I think it's gonna blow the doors off of anything we've seen in technology. Even those of us old guys who remember Betamax video cassette tapes, right? We ain't seen nothing yet. And so to be that predictive at this stage, I think is a little bit of a tough question. It's a great question. And I do think that it's something that we should absolutely be thinking about as we move into the space where we're preparing to deal with these things.
Rebecca, Minky, anything you want to add? And we'll move on to the next question from the audience. When disinformation happens due to the lack of correct and accurate information, what other options do consumers have to look at for the correct information? And I feel like you've answered this for the most part, but if there's anything else that any of you want to throw out there for Vianney, let me know. It just seems like we need to check multiple sources, right? And use our brains a little bit more. Anything else you want to add?
I mean,
Nope.
I have a really simple example, but it'll show you how hard it is sometimes to find good information. So I was trying to figure out what day was the bulk pickup trash in my neighborhood, right? Very simple thing. When should I put out? It was so hard to find on the City of Phoenix website. And then they had this very complicated color chart, and then I had to figure out where is my neighborhood on that color chart. I mean, I spent hours trying to figure out where my bulk pickup day might be, right? And so I'm just telling, like, if you have an official source of information, like, make it easy for people to find it, because when we don't, then we create a vacuum for bad information, or then people just don't use the service the way that as best as they could. So I would just encourage, like, the official sources to make themselves more user-friendly, make it easy for people to find, use chatbots, use graphics, make it accessible, think about various learning types, like all those things, because that's how we can prevent the vacuum from being filled with bad information.
Wonderful. Minky, any final thoughts?
No, I think that I've talked a lot about that already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adrian, anything you want to add?
Design is important. You know, the way that we design and present our information is incredibly important. We see, just as one example, bad ballot design have some really significant impact on elections in some places. And that goes to instructions. It goes to, I have the same issue with bulk pickup trash here in Phoenix myself. It's impossible to figure it out. I just throw it over my neighbor's wall and hope he deals. No, I'm just kidding. I don't do that.
We just watch for when our neighbors put it out, and then we're like, we probably have 2 or 3 days. So we always watch for, because to your point, Rebecca, it's a very confusing map. It's hard to figure out which zone you're in.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's really interesting is, you know, it's not just the consumer that can find themselves in a bubble, it's the government employee that can find themselves in a bubble. I talk about certain things in certain ways, and I'll use terms of art that are very specific to election administration or the law. Doesn't mean the same thing. The words have different meanings. And so I think we really have to pay close attention to the design of the messages, the design of, you know, the websites, particularly when it comes to folks with a variety of different abilities, you know, the way they look at things, the way they hear things, and so on. If they do, so we've got to really pay a lot more attention to these sorts of things. And it's challenging given the resources that we're given to do these jobs with. So I get the frustration from, you know, the government side of things, but we're working on it. I guess that's the one parting thought, right? We're working on it.
Well, and we're all working on it together. So I want to thank the 3 of you for making time for this really important discussion today, and for all the really great work and leadership that you're all doing. Thank you again, and we'll get this out to the rest of the One Community folks so that they can learn from all of you. Thank you.
So much.
Thanks, everyone.
Very much.
Take
Happy
care.
New Year, everybody.
All right.